Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Radio FWD podcast. My name is Shawn Gouralnik, and I'm happy to bring Will Sloan on the show. Will Sloan is a prolific journalist whose writing has appeared on The New Yorker and Jacobin, and he is also the co-host of the Important Cinema Club and the Michael and Us podcast. He's also an author who has an upcoming book on the low-budget films of Ed Wood coming out soon. And folks, they're calling him the king of Letterboxd. Please welcome Will Sloan.
Thank you. What a compliment. My God.
So I ask everyone this question, everyone who is a member of the U of T Cinema Studies Industrial Complex, the same questions. How does it feel to be back at U of T? I know these aren't your stomping grounds, but...
Yeah, actually, I went to the downtown campus, and I think it's very possible this is my first time ever at the Scarborough campus. But, I mean, all campuses sort of feel similar.
Yeah.
I met you in the food court downstairs, and, you know, could have been my food court, could have been any food court. Yeah. The hustle and bustle, the whatever you call it, very familiar.
So what sort of memories does U of T Cinema Studies bring back in your kind of, journalism career and film writing career?
Oh, gosh. Many memories. I think that what I learned a lot of stuff at U of T Cinema Studies, but I do think it was stuff that sort of, I think of it in terms of seeds that planted and sort of blossomed over many years. I think, you know, when I was a callow 18 or 19-year-old at U of T Cinema Studies, I probably would have thought, I'm not learning anything. I know everything. I'm really smart. But there were just many, you know, concepts, many kinds of movies, many ways of looking at movies that I was introduced to. Like in the second year, we took a film theory class, and there were certain concepts like, I don't know, the male gaze that I had never heard before, you know, Baudrillard's simulacrum. And I don't think I understood the significance at the time of, you know, having those concepts planted like seeds in your brain. Or I think of in my first year, you know, Intro to Cinema Studies class taught by Charlie Kyle. There was a week on experimental film, and he showed a movie called Touching by Paul Scherritz, where it was all like strobe lighting effects, and it was, God, how do I describe it? There was a guy, an image of a guy with his tongue out and these like scissors that were, you know, rather suggestively posed in front. It was just flashing, and it was the sound going touching, 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 touching. And, you know, the same week they showed Stan Brackage's Mothlight, and seeing stuff like that, which those two films were not crowd pleasers to the 18-year-olds in I&I 101. But, you know, to see something like that and to understand that a movie can look like that, that's a very profound thing that, again, plants a seed that blossoms over many years.
Yeah, I think Mothlight is kind of a cinema study starter pack,
Absolutely,
almost for like avant-garde film. And there's also another Dog Bite Man. Is that it?
Oh, Man Bite Dog, or no, you're thinking of Dog Star Man.
That's right. Dog Star Man.
Yeah.
So that I kind of had that same same sort of exposure and almost the exact same order too. So it's pretty funny that, yeah.
I remember actually in that I&I 101 class, they showed Jean-Luc Godard's 2 or 3 Things I Know About Her, which, again, not a huge crowd pleaser to a bunch of 19-year-olds in Toronto in the year 2008. Most of us didn't particularly have context for it. And I remember during the discussion, like, one person asked in good faith the question of, like, well, if the movie's not primarily intended to be, you know, entertaining,
enjoyable,
then what's the point of it?
Sure.
And putting aside whether or not that's an accurate assessment of what Godard was doing, I remember Charlie Kyle said, well, you know, fair question, but think about it this way. I have this pen here. The pen is primarily meant to write. I can also use it to scratch my back. I can also use it as a weapon to throw at people. Right. And I thought, oh, wow, that's very profound in its simple way. And I've thought about that a lot over the years. It's funny the things you remember, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's why I asked the question, because there are these anecdotes that are like buried deep in the memory wells, but so I'm trying to pull those out. So it's funny you bring up what films can be, because so many of the films you cover in a single day, even just looking at your Letterboxd diary, jump from genre to genre, from year to year, and from degrees of experimentation and budget too. How do you keep all of that straight? I mean, you talk about, you know, some really low budget like exploitation films and genre films, and then you also cover the biggest releases of the year and like The Brutalist and Anora, and like but still give credence and give a platform to all films throughout cinema history. What sort of do you look for in a film like that compared to, you know, the more big budget, big releases?
Well, in terms of just watching a lot of stuff and why I watch the things I do, a lot of it is out of professional obligation now. It's like I have to watch a certain number of things for the podcast that I do that I make my living at. But I also, I sometimes if I watch something of a certain milieu or genre or budget level, I guess I do have an impulse to want to watch something completely different after that. And how do you keep it straight? Or how do you give credence to all of these different kinds of movies? I think the one thing that would unite everything, it would be I would ask the movie, show me something interesting and show me something true. And that can come in countless different forms.
Yeah, I think these B movies tend to say something real about like the gritty underside maybe, or something that you don't normally see in mainstream films, and that maybe that's the value that you get out of a lot of them.
And sometimes, you know, a B movie or a low budget or an exploitation movie, you know, occasionally, because they're being made, you know, on the fringes where nobody is looking, there is an opportunity for sort of experimentation, or there's an opportunity for radical politics, or just an artist working out something complicated. You can see this in Ed Wood's films. You can see this in Oscar Michaud's films, Andy Milligan's films. But then also, you know, sometimes the movies are interesting for just what they capture almost in an accidental documentary way. Herschel Gordon Lewis, the great gore filmmaker of the 60s and 70s, you know, he was always shooting on these, you know, he was shooting in Florida a lot, and you see what Florida of 1965 looks like, far from any entertainment center, far from anywhere that's hip. You see where the people are dressed. Doris Wishman is another filmmaker like this, where, you know, she had a very unique and powerful aesthetic sense, but many of the places she captured, it's like it's 1965, but you know it might as well be 1955, and some of the clothes maybe from 1945, and it captures something, you know, authentic and real in a way that, or a different kind of authentic and real than, I don't know, A Hard Day's Night captures, or something else from the time.
Yeah, there's a historical impulse that, like, these are lost moments in time, but the films capture them, and that's pretty fascinating to look back at them. There's no other medium that does it like that. I mean, you can read a description, but it's nothing like seeing the people from that time.
Absolutely. And like, have you ever seen Chantal Akerman's movie News from Home?
I haven't, no.
It's a beautiful, you know, experimental film where much of the film is just these, like, and this is not an exploitation movie, by the way. This is more on the art side of the spectrum.
Sure.
But like, you know, it's these static shots of the New York subway or a New York street scene, while, you know, on the soundtrack, Chantal Akerman is reading the letters that her mother wrote to her in New York, and you're watching it, and it's like, wow, this is bottled time. This is 5 straight minutes of New York in the 1970s, and it's the closest you can get to time travel.
Yeah. Again, these sort of descriptions that you give of films, I'm guessing you haven't seen this film in a while, or maybe it's fresh in your mind, but regardless, the way that your podcasts tend to go, through my observation or through listening to your show, is a sort of journified description of the shots and the scenes in the film, then landing on an interpretation of what it means to you, or the sort of emotional or political expression that the film gives off. But specifically, I think a really unique aspect of your descriptions and a unique aspect of you and your co-hosts' conversations in these films feel like bedroom or, you know, living room conversations that I've had with my friends and my family.
Bedroom conversations, I hope.
Yeah. That's the Netflix and chill conversations about the insufferable conversations that I force my girlfriend to listen to regarding the shots of the movie. It's like, how about what's going on in the film? That, I think, is what you're getting at, though. It feels very natural, but still feels like something I can't do because you are a skilled critic, but you're getting at something that is really unique in a style that I think is sort of missing in film criticism or in film podcasts. So,
oh well, thank you, and I'm sure you can do it. Don't be hard on
podcasting's
yourself.
not that hard, actually. Yeah, no. No, but I would love to hear about, were there discussions about what style you guys wanted to land on in the various podcasts and the projects that you're in, or is this really just how you talk with your colleagues and your friends?
I would say there's a certain relaxed formality to the structure of both podcasts, and whatever the structure is has emerged very organically. And I would say it's about 90% instinct, 10% planning. With the Important Cinema Club, which I do with my friend Justin Decloux, it started. I'm not sure how it started actually. I think Justin, the way Justin consummates a friendship is to start a podcast with someone.
Really?
I think.
That's
I don't
funny.
know, but we just started doing this podcast, and I was at a moment where I was vulnerable to that because I was thinking, what is my career? What am I doing? Well, I might as well do this thing with my buddy Justin and see what happens. And I think originally we were thinking maybe we would do like double features where we could compare one thing to another. But then it just turned, without any discussion whatsoever, it turned into whatever it is now, which is typically centered on a person or a figure, but not necessarily. And it becomes, just a different subject every week, and has become a sort of like mini intro to that subject with personal reflections. And the other podcast, Michael and Us, has an even more circuitous route into its existence. It started in 2016, we thought, wouldn't it be fun to do a limited podcast where we watch all the films of Michael Moore and see how do the Michael Moore films hold up in this year, 2016. And obviously we ran out of Michael Moore movies, but we were just kind of having fun doing it. So now Michael is he's the patron saint of the podcast.
Oh, yeah. That's a great way of putting it.
He's kind of the sun around which it all orbits.
That's so funny.
And that's what I tell people now when they ask why it's called that.
Right.
I say, well, it's a podcast about politics and culture, and Michael Moore is our patron saint. And over time, it has just turned, again, very just instinctively into what it is now. But I would say whenever either of us do a podcast, there's maybe like 2 minutes of preliminary discussion about like, okay, this, and then, yeah.
It feels like Michael and Us is a bit more explicitly about current political events. You guys often open the show with discussion about recent news events before diving into a specific film.
That's right, and that also happened organically. That happened by accident just over the years, just seeing what worked and what we were comfortable with.
Okay.
And I would also say that there's so many companies that like spend a huge amount of money on their podcast divisions or have. Maybe the boom is over now, but there are so many that did that. And I think most of the podcasts over the years that have worked and that people like started entirely by accident.
Yeah.
And people have a terrible title that was a joke. And that
For sure.
people got stuck in it.
Yeah. I can totally see that. I'm just thinking of the podcast that I enjoy the most.
Right.
I'm like, if you could rename it, maybe you wouldn't because your fans probably love the name.
Right.
Like, I'm sure people love Michael and Us as a name, and they are themselves maybe fans or critical of Michael Moore and just wanted to hear something about Michael Moore. But I doubt anyone would want to change the show. There's a broader appeal with the Important Cinema Club, though. Like, this is Important Cinema.
Yeah. And in fact, I think in the first week we were maybe going to call it a French name. We were going to call it like the Club du Cinéma Important or something. So I'm glad we didn't do that.
Yeah. It would have fulfilled Quebec's dual language, dual language responsibilities.
Yeah. I'm afraid we were probably thinking more Cahiers du Cinéma than Canadian nationalism.
Right. Or Quebec nationalism.
Quebec nationalism, yeah.
So I want to tie in one of the kind of biggest figures maybe that you've discussed and talked about in your career recently, at least, which is Matt Farley. A tie-in to the previous things that I was mentioning regarding low-budget films and kind of renegade cinema and do-it-yourself culture, which I think is a dying art form given the slopification of film, which we'll get to in a second. Can you tell the viewers who might not know who Matt Farley is a little bit about him and why he was so fascinating to you?
Matt Farley is a guy who lives in Danvers, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston. The quickest thing you can say is he's written 25,000 songs because some years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, he realized that he had these novelty songs, that a really popular novelty song might make like $2 on the various streaming platforms over the course of a year. And if you multiplied 2 by like 20,000, maybe you could get a living off this. So he did this insane songwriting project where a lot of songs about poop, because he found that there were many kids who would say, "Hey Siri, poop." And so like hundreds of songs of like a name and poop, or just birthday songs about animals, songs about different foods, things that people search when they get bored. He's also a serious songwriter. He also has his own music, but like, how do you get your own music noticed in this vast,
in the void of the algorithm?
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you're not in one of the entertainment capitals, you don't know the right people.
Right.
But then during all of this, he also makes these movies with his friend Charlie Roxburgh, who he met in college. Charlie Roxburgh directs the films. The two of them write the films. Matt very much stars in the films. And they have created this Altman-esque repertory company out of friends and neighbors and uncles and parents and people's kids and whoever, coworkers, whoever is willing to be in a movie on a weekend. And the most famous movies for a while were these like monster movie parodies they would make, like Don't Let the River Beast Get You and Freaky Farley and Monsters, Marriage, Murder in Manch Vegas. But they've also, as they've gotten a bit more of a cult following, they've expanded into more serious in a way, or more uncategorizable movies like Magic Spot and Heard She Got Married and Boston Johnny, and they are
which, by the way, doesn't have a Boston accent. Boston Johnny does not have a Boston accent.
No,
which I was very disappointed to find.
Well, but what an accent he has! I mean,
yeah.
Boston Johnny is quintessential of their work in the sense that it's something that would be impossible to make if you had to pitch it to somebody.
Yeah, that's right. Which is why you can't. You do it yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, what if a guy had a silly voice?
Yeah.
That's basically the pitch.
Yeah.
Or what if there was a movie based on an SNL character who never existed? And I find them like inspirational figures. They operated for years, for a decade, just with like nobody noticing the films. And in doing that, they just created this like community of people who were in these movies. And people watch the movies, and like there are actors in the films like Kevin McGee, who's plays the heavy in many of the films, and he was just a guy who was like Matt Farley's boss at the group home that he worked at. Wow. And there are certain rooms in the world where if Kevin McGee enters it now, it's like Frank Sinatra walked in. There's this deference. And those are the only rooms in the world. The rest of the world, he's just like a normal guy from New England.
Sure.
I feel like I'm getting lost in the description of this, but the movies are very good too. They're really funny, and they harness the if you want amateurism, which I say with affection. They harness the amateurism into like a style and a philosophy about how like movies should be for everyone. Yeah,
they're so DIY. That's coming from like the music criticism terminology. It feels like a DIY garage band. You know what I mean? And
and like in some of the movies, in like Don't Let the River Beast Get You, it's this monster movie pastiche where you've got like somebody's uncle playing the cop. Yeah. And it obviously raises a certain question of, well, you wouldn't see a guy like this, a guy who acts like this, just somebody's uncle in a movie. And so there's something like, they'll laugh at me if they heard me say this, but there's something like Warholian about like, oh, can this be a movie star? But without the sort of like condescension of an Andy Warhol.
Right.
It's like,
or like cynicism.
Yeah. Or like it's media criticism in a way, but it's not like, the point of it is it's different from saying like, oh, what if this person was a star, and like everyone can be a star. That's like the difference in the philosophy.
the songwriting process, it feels like the end product of the proliferation of media and how it is proliferated nowadays. The film industry is algorithmically charged. Music is algorithmically disseminated. Your Spotify Explore page is basically a culmination of your habits and like your browsing habits and your listening habits. Did Matt Farley tap into something which is now coming in an age of like the biggest media companies, and this is the way that they're going to go about making new art and new media? Did Matt Farley basically predict the future of the algorithm and how all of this stuff is eventually going to work because people have to feed themselves?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think you can learn a lot from somebody by how they react to the concept of Matt Farley. I mean, I think the movies stand on their own, but when you talk about the music, a lot of what he's doing with his music career is this sort of performance art of like, it's this completely inhospitable system for the creator.
Yeah.
Like, you know, these companies, they rip the creators off. And it's this elaborate piece of performance art, basically. I mean, among other things, it's an elaborate piece of performance art to sort of make a joke about that.
Right.
And sometimes when mainstream outlets profile him, they approach him with a sort of skepticism of like, who's this guy gaming the system?
Yeah. Who isn't gaming the system?
And it's like, what about the system?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, do you have more sympathy for like Apple or whatever, or
Right.
like this performance artist
Yeah.
who's figured out a way to mess with it a little bit?
Well, what is the other gaming? There is like nepotism and
Right.
and unfair sort of networking that exists in the music industry. Why isn't that? I mean, it is kind of in the spotlight, but I'm saying you have somebody who's just clearly understood what the game is. The game is there. It's like the pretending that it's not, and then accusing someone of doing that. I've seen the articles, right, around Matt Farley. To me, it feels like perfect culmination of exactly the system that they've created. Like, this is the end product. The art and the film is made without like the art in mind, but rather with the system in mind, like you described. It's with the algorithm in mind.
You know, obviously, I'm fairly cynical about like all of these streaming platforms and
Yeah.
everything. And like you go on Netflix, there's been so much writing about how like Netflix isn't really in the like movie business; it's in the subscription
Service business. Yeah, that's right.
And it's like the movies aren't necessarily even meant to be watched, really. Or it doesn't really matter if they are, but I also think
it's the tap that they slowly whatever. They let the tap flow and the slop starts
Sure.
flowing, and there's an endless supply of it.
But I also think, I mean, as potentially harmful as all that is, I do think like, you know, you can't really have a hit without a palpable hit, and it's harder and harder to measure what a palpable hit is, given that
Yeah.
these things like, you know, the metrics are often invisible to us, but like you can sort of feel it when something is resonating.
The metrics, you mean like box office numbers? Or
Yeah,
that sort
like
of
box
thing?
office, you know, is a very easy way
Sure.
to measure if something is
Netflix doesn't give that out,
right.
though, right?
Exactly. Or
That's
they
the
do these
obfuscation.
They do these absurd statistics of like, 60 million people watch this, 70 million people watch
Sure.
this, and it's like, well, I'm not feeling that.
Are you talking like a Twitter view watched, where it's like 3 seconds
Right.
of the autoplay counts as a watch? We don't know what the the numbers are. There's a like in the DIY sphere, when you're uploading and producing stuff on your own, you see your numbers in analytics. They're fed to you constantly. I upload these podcast numbers, and then I get obsessive over which thumbnails and subtitles and or regular titles and descriptions work best. You know.
But you know, I don't think you can have a cultural phenomenon without like
A few swings and misses.
Well, without a palpable like cultural buy-in.
Oh,
so
yeah.
like, I remember there was the pandemic year at the Oscars when I think Nomadland won, and there were all these movies that were nominated, like Mank and the Aaron Sorkin movie about the Chicago 7.
Yeah, right.
All these movies that I don't think anybody has watched in 5 years, if they
Sure.
if they even did watch them at the time.
Sure.
And that was because like all those, there was no as problematic as box office is, and like it's almost like the primary process in a presidential election, where there has to be some palpable buy-in to whatever this candidate is.
Sure.
There has to be some measurable way that this has tapped into the zeitgeist. And that Oscar year, it's almost like it elided that.
It shows what happens if that disappears.
Yeah, like
basically.
it went straight from like there was the campaign to the Oscars without any need to measure whether there was a zeitgeist. And this year, a movie like The Substance, which I don't love, but I feel like there's a palpable like base of support behind that movie. That movie has resonated with a lot of people.
Sure.
Or what else?
I've talked about The Substance now in every episode since I started.
I think that,
it's unbelievable.
That speaks to, it's kind of undeniable.
Yeah.
Like that movie resonates with a lot of people.
Sure.
I think Honora resonates with a lot of people.
Sure.
A lot of these movies do sort of like, when the audience is involved.
Well, what was the big post-COVID audience involvement zeitgeist was like Barbenheimer, right?
Sure.
That was like, okay, we're so back for moviegoers.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And so like as much as, these companies would insist that like they've got it all figured out and the algorithms are the future and stuff, I think that speaks to fundamentally they don't have it all figured out. It's like the audience. You can't have a hit without the audience making the decision. And for something to be a hit, it has to like interact with the zeitgeist. It has to speak to the times in a way that's not predictable.
Yeah, I truly believe, now we'll never know for sure, but that it wasn't astroturfed, the Barbenheimer cultural,
I think,
the memes.
Certainly it was helped along by like
the studios.
by studios,
Sure.
but at the end of the day, like the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah.
People were very into both movies.
Yeah. Okay, so we have what we definitely can consider slop now.
And I think so.
It's definitely different from like the low budget exploitation films that still, regardless of their style, their output, the ease of production of the older films that were kind of just pulpy. But why do they feel different than the slop of today?
Yeah.
I don't want to call them slop because they're not. You would return to Bloody Moon, right? Like you just showed it, and yet it's so like, it's grotesque and it's silly and it's like I think campy, but you would still return to it. It has so much merit. You're not going to return to like that. What's that weird like pandemic era comedy about it's like a huge ensemble cast of all
The Bubble?
The Bubble.
Yeah.
We're not going to have the Bubble screening in like 5 years.
Yeah. I don't want to be too dogmatic. I don't want to paint with too broad a brush because like bad, cynically made movies have always existed and will always exist.
Like cheap sequels, right? Just like cash grab sequels.
Sure. Or like old, there are a lot of old exploitation films that are bad. I mean, the older exploitation films or B movies that I think live on are the ones where you could feel they're typically the ones where you can feel like the artist's personal touch. Ones where like Bloody Moon. You mentioned that film by Jess Franco. Jess Franco was somebody who made 180 films, more than that.
Wow.
It might have made 200 films. It's funny. It's the rare filmography where you can add or subtract 20 movies. It doesn't necessarily.
It's like counting countries depending on which body.
You're still in the right ballpark of how many movies he made.
That's funny.
And a lot of those movies were obviously made like cheaply and sort of cynically, but some of them weren't. And like his personality, because he was making these movies as if they were free associative writing exercises some of the times, like he had a particular way of looking at the world and a particular way of like creating a mise en scène, holding the camera, that make his films interesting company if you like his personality. His personality is throughout the work, and I think that's it, like personality.
Yeah. I'm just picturing the sequel, the what I briefly mentioned about sequels too. I went through and watched all of the Alien movies to prepare for Romulus.
Including versus Predator?
Oh, yeah. No, I didn't actually. Not the W.S. Anderson movies. No, I didn't get to those.
So
I probably
you
should.
watched
like Fincher's.
the ones that Ridley made in the 2010s. What are they called again?
Prometheus.
Yeah.
And then Alien Covenant.
Yeah, I saw those movies.
But,
yeah.
so, okay. You start to see the personality get drained over time. I think they get grayer and they get less. They're more cynical, and they're more obviously become self-referential to the point where they, again, I've mentioned this before, but literally reanimate the dead body of one of their former stars in Alien Romulus. Is that the sort of progression that we're heading towards, like head first, or
well,
is there
I can't predict the future, but
Sure.
I am a little concerned about, like, you know, when I saw the ads for Alien Romulus, which I still have not seen.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I saw the ads and I thought, oh, this just looks like the first movie again, but
Yeah.
like not as good. And like,
Yeah.
how many times, like, it always feels like we're within 5 years of a new Terminator reboot, or within 5 years of a new Predator reboot. And more often than not, they're just like a kind of rehash of the first one. Like The Exorcist is another one. Like,
Yeah.
we're always within like 2 to 8 years of these brands getting recycled
Sure.
again to increasingly diminishing returns.
Sure.
And I don't feel that that's sustainable. Like,
No,
you look
yeah.
at the top 10 box office movies of any year now, and they're all sequels.
Yeah.
And it would be nice to think that at a certain point, like, we can dream of a future again, as you know, to think in like Mark Fisher terms.
Yeah, that we can think of a future. That's
Yeah.
a really good way of putting it. I don't know if you caught the Super Bowl at all, but all of the film announcements, all of the ads that were played were all sequels. Every single one, pretty
I
much.
I saw the Kendrick halftime show. That's all I saw.
Oh, nice.
of it.
Yeah, that was. How do you feel about that?
Well, you know, I think Toronto's down for the count. I think we need a new guy, and I think it can be me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You're gonna step up to the plate.
Yeah, I think I can do it.
No. So we got what did we get? We got Lilo and Stitch live action. We got
That's funny because I assume Stitch is the cartoon, right? Like,
yeah,
he's
yeah.
the little guy.
Yes,
Okay.
and he ran around on the field.
He's still animated though, right?
He's animated, but it's like the Lion King version animated, where it's like
God.
a 3D model, like grotesque slobbing.
I mean, hey, if
Slobbering
people
thing.
want this, that's great. But like, I don't know why you wouldn't. I felt this way about the Lion King remakes, which I haven't seen. But I thought, like, I know the cartoon was so expressive. You can do so much with animation. Why do
Yeah,
you
it
want?
just looks so dull.
Why do you want
And
it
that's for
looking
children?
boring and
No, right?
ugh, I don't know.
Well, I watched the.
Why do you want a realistic Lilo and Stitch? I don't get it.
Doesn't make sense to me at all. And frankly, like all of the life force is like sucked out of these films to just churn out the same film again for a new generation of young audiences. But then, I mean, they're so capable of making original films.
Well, these companies are so like risk averse.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which operated without a hitch for like 15 years, like it sort of created this model of like the expectation that every single one of these, you spend $500 million, so you make $1 billion. And if like Disney really perfected this model, or seemed to, of like investing a lot in IP. And the IP can like sustain itself forever.
Well, even they're lobbying to keep their intellectual property secure for 70 years post artist's death. Is like that's pretty much all Disney.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, the problem is like, you know, art doesn't really work that way, does it? Like you can't actually like predict art in the way that you predict like mathematics.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you can't predict that the audience will buy into something forever. But you know, when you're spending this much money, the studios get very risk averse.
Sure.
And they're run by, you know, bean counters and like Philistines and
Sure. I was going to say briefly about their capabilities. I think The Wild Robot is a great example of that. Totally original story. It's based off of a children's novel, or children's book, but they're totally capable of it, of a beautiful art style, of a unique story, not dependent on selling action figures and stuff like that. They can do it. They can do it.
Yeah. Well, when I run a studio, we're gonna do it.
Okay, sure. I want to get into some rapid fire questions, if that's okay.
Let's go. Yeah.
Now you've been giving awesome, thoughtful responses. They don't need to be quick responses. It's more like these are more casual questions. It'll brighten the mood after worrying about the slopification of our favorite art form. Can you explain your Letterboxd rating system? Why do some films get stars with no hearts and hearts with no stars?
There is no thinking behind this. I mean, typically I don't like star ratings.
Yeah.
I sometimes find it kind of ridiculous when you're on there and you see like somebody has given, Touch of Evil 4.5 stars, and you think, why not the extra half star? Or like, do I give last?
Also, who are you?
Yeah. And do I give Last Year at Marienbad 4 stars because I like Hiroshima Mon Amour more, and I give that 5?
Sure.
And it's like I don't know. It's dumb.
Yeah.
But every now and then, just to make a point, I'll do it. I hate even thinking this much about it,
Letterboxd,
because it's not like Letterboxd pays me for this.
Right.
That's the
you
other
just
thing.
tweeted about today. It's you're hoping you'll get royalties from your old Letterboxd reviews, right?
Yeah. So I also resent this platform that I've devoted so much of my life to.
Sure. When did you join or start? Were you like an early adopter?
It was like 2018, 2017.
Relatively early.
And I just joined because I had friends on there, and we were just exchanging.
Hey, that's where it all starts.
We were just hanging out with friends, and that is still really how I approach it, because I'm not getting paid for this. So
right.
I really I truly. This sounds disingenuous, but it's actually true. I think it's something that I use to hang out with my friends and share things with my friends. And if 18,000 people want to look at it, they can.
Well, it's kind of the story of how all of these social medias start, right? Facebook. I mean, there's a cynical story about Facebook, but generally speaking, it started as a way to just like see your friends' photos, and then it's devolved into what's the Letterboxd devolving gonna look like? Monetization.
Oh man.
And subscription models. I don't see them doing it.
Yeah, actually, as much as I was complaining that Letterboxd doesn't give me any money, I would give them credit for not turning into like the slop factory that all these other platforms are. You don't see like horrible AI generated like content constantly when you're scrolling on Letterboxd, so I give them that.
Yeah, and do you think it's helped redirect traffic to your full length reviews, your blogs, and your posts in the New Yorker and all of your work, your books, and that sort of thing? Do you think it's helped your brand at all?
I hope so. Now I've only written for the New Yorker once.
Sorry.
But no, don't apologize. But hey, the door is open. If they're watching,
we'll say Jacobin instead.
Yeah. Well, do I get any audience from it? I mean, I hope so. I mean, actually, I should say that like. I know that there are a lot of people who know me only from Letterboxd, and so I guess I have to take that seriously on some level.
I mean, you're so often the first review that pops up on any given film's page just through the sheer number of likes that you get. It's pretty cool little like niche internet microcelebrity fandom that you've created on that platform.
Yeah.
It's what I'm trying to go for. I want like a 2,000 follower Twitter account. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no, hey, I think we can do it.
So who are your favorite accounts on Letterboxd?
Oh goodness, I like Branson Reese, the cartoonist. He's funny. I also there's a guy named Felix Dembinski who does reviews that I like a lot. He's often reviewing like Poverty Row horror movies from like the 30s and 40s, really obscure stuff. I like people with like the freak taste.
Yeah. There's I think Electric Wizard that I like a lot. It's obviously named after a famous stoner metal band, but he's got a crazy eclectic taste, and I found so many weird okay, this is clearly only available on VHS. How did you find this film?
Yeah. I'll stop there because like the people I like are all the people I follow, and I don't want to leave anyone out. Sure. Those are two that I like.
Sure, I won't press you any further on that. What's a film that you seem to love despite resounding hatred for it?
Off the top of my head, I'm a huge fan of Clint Eastwood's The 1517 to Paris.
Okay.
Which I think is one of his best movies, and I feel like still hasn't got the credit it deserves. This bizarre docu-fiction hybrid that Clint Eastwood made when he was 87. Have you heard of this movie?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. It was like, these three like guys who failed the military, who thwarted a terrorist attack on a train, and like he recreated their life story with these three guys who are not actors and are not charismatic.
Right.
And so much of the movie is just spent with them wandering around Europe doing nothing particularly interesting until they thwart the terrorist attack. And I thought, like, what an insane avant-garde thing to make when you're Clint Eastwood at 87.
Sure, it feels a bit like his close-up.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. So I haven't gotten to it. Of course, I've heard of it, but I haven't quite gotten to it. You also gave, I think, pretty high praise for his, maybe not praise, but it triggered a very interesting discussion. His newest film, Juror Number 2.
I love Juror Number 2.
Yeah. I didn't want to misquote you, but I was pretty sure that you really enjoyed it. Adam Naiman actually said the same thing, that everyone he's heard talk about the film externally has said that they didn't look at their phone once. They were totally enthralled by it because it is a movie-shaped object.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes, he's right. And like it also looks different. Like there are so many movies, Netflix sheen, basically.
Yeah. Of
like,
course.
That just glaze that all the Netflix movies have. Like maybe it's just a result of Clint Eastwood being, I think he's 94 now. It's like he just makes movies that look like they don't need the screen wiped.
Yeah. Again, like this is your memory bank is remarkable. Your ability to remember specific scenes, but the Netflix sheen is like really hard to describe.
I don't know. I hate watching those movies.
I know it's brutal, but that's what we're getting. It's terrible.
Hey, listen, we got 130 years of film history.
Yeah.
Don't need to be stuck on the front page of Netflix.
No, that's true. And
just get your VPN and
100%.
Yeah.
I'm very glad that you've acknowledged. Sailing the high seas, because this is something that I've brought up to much chagrin of my guests very often, I think. I've talked about this before, but I'd love to get your perspective on it. I think I have a very different upbringing in the film world because I had unfettered access to a VPN and qubit torrent. And compare that to like the video store upbringing or the film cinema studies tradition of being told what to watch by a renowned professor or something like that. I think growing up in the internet age with unlimited access to film has totally changed the sorts of films that I'm into and the sorts of films I've had access to. I was wondering what.
Well,
how you feel
absolutely,
about
and
that.
actually, that's another thing that Letterboxd has done. I feel like it facilitates word of mouth for stranger and more offbeat movies in an easier way. Now that they've gamified it, now that they've made it a performative thing, which I think is good. But as to piracy. Obviously, let's take it as given that like if you can afford to pay for like that independent film, you can afford to pay for that lovingly restored Blu-ray release, you should do it. But I've often been struck by how many art films from like let's say before 2010 it's impossible to find if it's not on the Criterion channel, and not even just. Like it's impossible to find for even a $5 rental. We just did a podcast episode about this African filmmaker named Idrissa Undrega. I'm sorry, I'm sure I mispronounced his last name, but he made a number of films in the late 90s and the early 90s and the late 80s. And briefly, he was like one of the few African filmmakers who was showing his films regularly at Cannes, Berlin, Venice. And his films are just impossible to find anywhere. Like you can't rent them, you can't stream them anywhere. Out of print DVDs from companies that went out of business years ago, and that's so much of film history. It feels like.
I get crazy FOMO post festival, worrying about which films will never get distribution deals and will just be shown at a festival for once, particularly small markets, small countries. So I saw a film from Kazakhstan in my first TIFF when I got my first press pass, and I went to see films with my dad for the first time at TIFF. One of the films we went together was a film from Kazakhstan called Life. It wasn't very good, but it still has yet to get a distribution or any sort of showing. And if you look at the TIFF catalog, there's probably countless films like that, and I just get such FOMO about it.
Yeah, and I mean that's where that's where piracy, I think, is probably your best resort.
Sure. Okay. Oh, there's one more question that I think is for our era the most important one. There's been some discussions about what is the quintessential Biden era film, but I'm gonna ask you, with the way that potentially the Canadian election might go, and depending on who the Liberal Party leader is going to be, that's not as important. But what is the quintessential film of the Trudeau era?
Oh, wow. The quintessential film of the Trudeau era. I don't have a ready answer for that, and it's bad that I don't, because it goes to show you how quickly you think of all of history just in terms of American history.
Sure.
When you're in Canada, because then you think about okay, what even were the Canadian movies of the last 10 years? And I'm not sure which one, because our zeitgeist, sorry to be using that word so much, but our zeitgeist is so shaped by American film and American culture. We had Barbieheimer phenomenon. So I struggle to think of what the Trudeau era film is.
Well, thinking back, what were the most successful? No, that's obviously not the answer. I'm just trying to jog your memory. What were the most successful Canadian films of the last 10 years? It's probably Blackberry most recently.
Blackberry. That would be a good pick. I mean, I think of I Like Movies.
I Like Movies with Chandler Levac.
Although I don't necessarily think of that as the definitive Trudeau era film.
No, that's the definitive Canadian film bro movie.
Yeah, I found much to identify with in that film.
I think we all have. Which is partly why I think it was so successful in the era of Letterboxd and Criterion Collection and movie tote bags.
Yeah. But if I were to try to think of a film that defined the Trudeau era, I would think of something that embodied a time that was very, very superficially progressive. Had a mask
Green Book or something like that.
Had a mask of superficial progressivism over just rot and decay.
What's your answer for the Biden era?
I think it would be Killers of the Flower Moon.
Oh yeah, wow.
That's my go-to, because I think that's a movie that's about it's about Indigenous genocide, and it's also about the circles of culpability and the degrees of complicity that all of society takes part in when something like that is happening. You've got somebody like the Robert De Niro character who's a real mover of the genocide. You've got somebody like the Leonardo DiCaprio who's a direct accomplice, and then you've got the rest of us who just sort of either benefit from it, or we don't really feel that we have the tools to fight it, so might as well try not to think about it.
Yeah.
So on that note.
Yeah, well, no. I was going to say, do you watch the award shows at all? Do you care?
Well, I watch the Oscars, because that's the time of the year when all of culture thinks about the movies.
Yeah.
So, of course, I watch that.
Is that another a contractual obligation that you mentioned earlier?
I guess there's also part of me that just likes seeing a bunch of movie stars in a room still. But I think
that's fair.
The best justification for the Oscars I ever heard was from Mark Harris. I heard him once say that the Oscars are a time capsule of how the movie industry wants itself to be viewed at that moment. And so I think if you look at it through that lens, the Oscars are valuable and interesting, and through no other lens.
Okay, on that note, what are your Best Picture predictions? Do you think what would you like to win? What would you like to win?
What I'd like to win? I don't have any strong feelings about what I want to win, but if I were to predict it right now, well, I saw that Anora won a bunch of the Producers Guild, Directors Guild. So if I had to lay down money, I would lay down a soft bet on Anora for Best Picture right now.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't get the best odds, and I think that's understandable.
Yeah. I think if all those guilds are voting for it, I think that probably speaks well to it.
Yeah.
And I feel like the Emilia Perez, which I've not seen, the Emilia Perez party seems to have been deflated a little bit.
Yeah, no kidding, eh? I mean, all of these films had a little bit of drama tossed up in them, like we had Nora talking about like
Intimacy coordinator discourse.
And then you've got the Brutalist potentially having AI, and that turned out to be a lie. Or it was so
Zionism discourse.
The Zionism discourse
film.
for sure,
Yeah,
of course. Which I think is, as a Jewish person myself, I think that made the film more interesting than not. I was really tackling with what that film meant to me, especially this conversation that they had in the film about whether we are more Jewish if we do leave.
Yeah. What did you think of the? Not to spoil it, but what do you think of the coda of the Brutalist?
Well, it kind of defeats that conversation a little bit. Like you talk about whether or not you are more or less Jewish for leaving, and then his like swan song near the end is that he's like peacefully residing in Jerusalem.
That's how it came across to me, and I've seen other people kind of like tie themselves into knots. I feel like trying to
excuse the film or
trying to say that it's actually saying something else in the last scene. I don't know.
I thought it was pretty explicit.
I thought so too, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just dense.
No, that's the interpretation I got out of it, and but yeah. Anyways,
but enough about the Brutalist.
Yeah. What are maybe some underrated films of 2024 that you wish more people saw?
Oh, I liked. There was a local film that I really enjoyed called The Pee Pee Poo Poo Man.
Oh yeah, of course.
Did you see it?
Well, wasn't that about U of T and the incidences on U of T a couple years? I mean, I was taking classes during that time, so I remember.
Yeah, it was.
I didn't see the film though.
It was based on a real incident, but it is in no way really based on the actual incident.
Oh, it's not a documentary.
No, it's a comedy. Really.
Oh, okay. That's so funny.
It's a comedy about. Well, I don't even know how to describe it, but I just laughed and I laughed and I laughed. I thought it was really funny. Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
I think in that same vein, I loved Rap World.
Oh, I loved Rap World. Yeah.
That's probably my pick for underrated film. Okay, if you would like to plug anything, if you have something upcoming that you'd like to mention at the end here, that'd be awesome.
Well, I do have my two podcasts, The Important Cinema Club and Michael and Us, and keep an eye out for my Ed Wood book. Coming later this year.
Super excited.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, thanks so much for listening, and let's give a round of applause for Will.
Geez. Thank you.
Hold on, before we cut, do you only watch TV or do you watch like TV series as well?
You know, I have a hard time making time for TV, really episodic TV. I watch it sometimes. I love. I'm a huge fan of Vanderpump Rules.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, my girlfriend will love this. We have to include this. I'm sorry.
Please,
I know we
please.
just. Is it like a palate cleanser to watch reality TV?
So I'm actually not into that much reality TV, but it was Vanderpump Rules specifically that I've become an obsessive fan of.
Really?
And I don't know what it is. It was like within the first 10 minutes of watching the first episode, I thought like, oh man, this like backdrop that they're up against, this horrible milieu. I mean, these characters are incredible. Actually, if I could just summarize why I love Vanderpump Rules so much.
Please do. This is incredible.
In one scene. So all these people are allegedly like servers and waiters at this horrible restaurant called SUR, Sexy Unique Restaurant. That's what it stands for.
Oh my gosh.
And they all have their little dramas, and it's overseen by Lisa Vanderpump, who's the matriarch, and she has millions and millions and millions of dollars and lives in this huge, horrible, tacky mansion.
McMansion.
Yeah, it's awful. She's a former Real Housewife. But she's the epitome of class and elegance and grace, or so the show wants you to think. And she's like the den mother of this community of messy bartenders. And I just remember one episode. It's so fleeting, but she's at a table at SUR with some of her celebrity friends, and one of them is Lance Bass from NSYNC. And I thought, yeah, that's about right. This woman who's like the epitome of class and elegance and grace, about on par with Lance Bass in the real world.
Right. So So this is just like some sick fascination of yours.
I think the first 2 seasons of Vanderpump Rules are like the great American novel. It's so
Really?
riveting. These characters, you know.
I kind of get it in a kind of like looking through the glass and knocking on the aquarium walls a little bit.
Well, I think, you know, the showbiz world that it takes place in is very fascinating. I haven't really had this with any other reality
What about
show.
the style? Because I'm always like so jarred by the editing style of these reality shows, and their sound cues are always just so ridiculous.
It's a bit like Paul Schrader's The Canyons, if you've ever seen that,
Yeah,
just in
with-
terms of its aesthetic.
With
With Lindsay Lohan.
Yeah, of course. Maybe modeled after those reality shows a little bit.
I think probably a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it feels like too much for me. It's like jarring. I feel like I get a headache or like a stomach ache when I watch shows like that.
That's totally fine. I would say, you know, watch the first episode, and if it doesn't immediately like possess you, like full body,
Right.
then I would say don't watch it.
I guess I'm like randomly I was a fan of like a competition shows as a kid. Like I watched Ink Master. I don't have any tattoos.
Yeah, my partner loves the Great British Bake Off.
Oh, sure.
Because it's a nice,
Well, that's, like,
it's a nice
wholesome.
show,
Yeah.
and they're all sweet, and they help each other.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
And they're like, someone starts crying, and they're like, "Oh, it's okay,"
Yeah.
instead of like, "Yeah, you jerk."
It's a nice thing to hear in the background, you know.
Sure. No, but Ink Master, like Project Runway, like all these. I think Project Runway I was exposed to by my mom, and I just wanted to hang out with my mom, so I watched some Project Runway, and through osmosis, maybe it started to like the competition shows. But now, look how that's morphed too. You've got Mr. Beast games.
Oh my God, I don't even want to know anything about that. That sounds awful.
Yeah, I think if the editing in Vanderpump Rules gives me a headache, I think I would probably have a stroke if I watched the Mr. Beast games. So yeah.
I bet.
Okay.
I was only asking that because I was wondering if you watched Severance. That's all.
No, I don't, but I should. It's all I hear people talking about now, so I should.
Yeah.
Do you
Especially
watch
as a-
it? Do you like
yeah,
it?
I'm caught up, especially as a fan of like scenes.
Yeah.
As Shawn told me, you're such a good describer of scenes. You would probably love the scenes.
I'll see if I can sell my girlfriend on watching it, because that's typically how I watch episodic TV. To
Oh,
be
yeah.
honest. Yeah. So I think we can make this happen.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Well, thanks again, Will, for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
That was great. Awesome.